We'll continue, and Director Brown, if you could introduce who you have with you, and then you could take off. Yes, sir.
Well, welcome. Appreciate everybody time for tonight, all the aldermen and mayor. I want to thank my staff for putting together the budget this year. It's a lot of hours, a lot of hard work that goes into it. Some of the highlights that we have, there's no increase for any of the funds this year for us. The funds are balanced, electric and water. Some of the balancing decisions that we make at a higher level, come into play to make cuts based upon those initial requests from our first line supervisors. Water cut $5.2 million and electric cut 13.8. Our head count's at 615. We've increased it by one position just for we're taking over the duties for the police department for their messenger clerk. So we're taking on that duty for them. One of the bigger items that I like to talk about is our new safety record that we accomplished this year. So we've never been this low before with in regards to safety, and I kind of want to tout that a little bit. Some of the water fund highlights: we've used $4.78 million basically from existing fund balance to balance our budget. Revenues are dropping a little bit, about 1.2%. Expenditures are decreasing in the water division just because of the capital projects are wrapping up. And then our debt coverage ratio is expected to be 1.62. On the electric side, retail load is continuing to decline. One of the more alarming items for this year's budget is our significant decreases in wholesale sales and capacity revenues. We're expecting a $2 million drop for wholesale sales and $5 million in capacity revenue. What comes further is next year we are expecting an additional $1 to $2 million drop in capacity sales. The capacity market basically provides very, very little revenue going forward. The reason we didn't have as much of an impact for this coming fiscal is we'd pre-sold some of our capacity, so we didn't get hit as hard. But that'll no longer be the case the following year. And our debt coverage is expected to be 1.72. So just looking at some variances between last fiscal and this fiscal for expenses, so you can see that both funds are down as far as that goes. Some employee demographics that we wanted to kind of share. As for minority hiring, you can see that over the years we've been increasing, but in this fiscal that we're in right now, we're actually increased minority hiring more than what we have in the past. So we're definitely headed in the right direction. Female demographics, we're pretty much about the same through the years. That really hasn't changed much, hovering around the 18% mark. So on to safety, we've hit this new record of 2.5 for an incident rate, and the incident rate is basically just a measure that we can compare against other entities, and so we kind of know where we're at, and then where we can track where the accidents are at. And if you look back at 2004, where we really started taking a focus on safety, we've done so much with our safety programs, improving them, safety and using the safety incentives. It's made a big difference. As you can see, how much it's dropped, and you compare it to like APPA, which is American Public Power Association. Granted, it doesn't have that water component in it, but it's still a pretty good comparison, and we've dropped below them as well. So not only are we, bringing home our employees safer, but this starts to impact the budget when we start looking at also lowering our workman's comp claims. When that translates into dollars and expense, and you can see back in 2004, and for a few years there, we were averaging around 2.5 million, and this year we're down to about 250,000 for annual expenses. So the real key there is dropping the number of claims by reducing our accidents. Another benefit to us is productivity. Lost time days of work for the employees that are injured, and you can see in the past where we were and where we've dropped to. So we're definitely making huge strides with our safety programs. Now on to our contribution to the corporate fund. Apologize for the smaller font. But what we've done was we've kind of broken it down into electric and water funds and to show where we're at for the last few fiscals and where we're at now. Now you can see that the totals basically at the bottom of it are from last fiscal to this fiscal. We're increasing probably about 1.5 million. It's really for a new item for the shared services payment. So we provide the pilot, the free services, and the shared services payment. So the free services are off to the left, where we provide the street lights, traffic lights, ISD, water, snow plowing around the lake areas and some subdivisions. And then the shared services payment is really it's that newer item that we're paying for basically legal work, HR work, mayor's office a little bit, and then and some parts of some OBM functions. So on to the water fund. You can see here with the pie chart that our biggest expense is labor, followed by capital improvements. Then our water fund expenses, what we want to do is we want to try to compare it from last fiscal to this fiscal and let you see, where we're changing at. And you can see where we're declining in most areas for expenses, where capital improvements is dropping the biggest because of the reduced cost in capital projects, because those projects are winding down. For funding, for revenue for water, it really comes from our retail revenues. That's our biggest source of revenue. And here you can see that revenue is declining, along with our bond proceeds as well. But then again, we're spending less on those capital dollars. One of the slides I kind of wanted to add for water is just a little bit of background information on sales. And you can see that in FY13 where we were at, and then we started declining through the years. And it's a slower decline as it's been moving forward. So we're starting to flatline a little bit. So if that continues, what we wanted to show is that we're not exactly continuing that sharper decline, but sales are slightly still declining, remaining flat. So that produces a problem as expenses increase. Where in past years, when you have sales increasing, expenses increasing, they can offset each other. One of the other things I wanted to show was our fund balance, that basically through the years we've been using fund balance to balance the budget in the water side, slowly drawing down our balances to balance the budget. So using that cash, it's when we show you that we're doing okay with the water side, we are still in good shape right now, but that doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. And so you can see the trends, and we're just basically wanting to show everybody up front that this is the trends that are occurring with the water side. And eventually, there won't be any money to balance the budgets anymore for the water. And you can kind of see that same effect with the debt coverage ratio. We're still in good shape, but overall, you can see it's declining slightly. But we're still above the minimum. So on to some projects for water. So at the filter plant, we're adding filters to improve the filtering capacity of the filter plant, our water plant purification process. The supplemental water supply, our secondary water source, we're currently wrapping up the supplemental environmental impact statement with the Army Corps of Engineers. So there's still expenses that we're going to have on the engineering efforts for that. We're hoping to have maybe a draft document to the Corps in March sometime. And then I'll take a period of time for them to review and then figure out where we go from there on what alternatives we're going to pursue. Mains, meters, hydrants, infrastructure. That's some big items that we have to work on every year. So we have $3.5 million for that. And then basically just kind of a net cost for our lake services. The services that we perform around the lake is around $2.4 million. Vehicles, we don't have a lot on the water side just because it's a tighter budget. We have 3 water trucks, a dump truck, and 3 equipment trailers. Some annual projects that we do that are longer term is really in the Lake Springfield watershed and installing best management practices, the BMPs, around the lake. That's important because it's improving the water quality of the lake. And we are applying for assistance, looking for grants, various programs that can help us with financial assistance so we can install more BMPs. And we work with various agencies to do that. Another water quality issue for the Springfield Lake is sewers. So we want to get all the sewers for the lake homes off of septic and onto the district's sewer system. We have 329 properties that we want to convert. So over the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to spend close to $2 million on that process. We also want some changes in Chapter 96 that would actually help speed up that process a little bit and codify some of those items to make it clearer. We also want to finish with our automated meter reading. The electric side has pretty much done all of their work on that issue, where water, we have about 2/3 installed right now. And we want to continue that work, but it is expensive. So it's going to take 8 to 9 years at about $7.5 million to do so. But the faster we can get there, the better we are, is because we can reduce labor for the meter readers once we get to all the automatic meter reading. So for the future, some of the bonded projects that we would have is really our secondary water source options, and there is a range there because we don't know what alternative really we're gonna be ending up with. So we don't know what that final cost might be, but some of the items that we are trying to anticipate maybe in the next year's budget that we have in there, but they are bonded, is land purchases, some legal work, and as well as engineering. Water main replacements, again, looking for our infrastructure moving forward. We'd like to see, if we can bond projects, we want a 20-year project, 30-year project for $1 million basically a year on average to do about, $1 million a mile. Lead service lines, it's really, if it's required by the US EPA in the future, this is not guaranteed, but if it is, this is what we can expect to occur if that were to actually take place. And the reason it's expensive is because if the service lines are in the roads and you have to do road repairs, that's where a lot of the costs come into play. So a SWOT analysis for water is looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The strengths, again, we have low water rates. We're the second and the lowest in the state with good cash position. Our water treatment plant upgrades that we've done over the last 5 years or 6 years, they're going to last 50 to 60 more years or plus. So we've invested heavily in our water system, and it's going to pay off moving forward. The South Fork pumping station. When the lake is down like it is right now, if there's water in the South Fork, we pump. But as the case right now, we don't because it's dry. But it's a benefit all through the year to use that facility. And right now the lake is about 4.5 feet down. It's getting close to that. We'll be back to talk about that issue in more detail in a few weeks. Weaknesses, or actually, I'm sorry, back to the strengths. Just, again, it's our safety commitment that we have on the water side. And electric will have the same thing. Weaknesses, the uncertainty of the supplemental water supply. It's just there's a lot of work still to do with that to determine what our final solutions are going to be. There's still opposition to overcome. The age of the distribution infrastructure, and then the little revenue that we have to replace it, our weaknesses. The low customer charge makes us sensitive to changes in demand. So when we have cool summers and the water usage really drops off, our revenues fall. So our water sales are remaining flat to declining. Debt coverage is dropping, and the cash position is dropping, which just makes us weaker financially. Opportunities. Again, supplemental water progress. To make progress on a secondary water source is really, allowing us to be able to grow our community in the future. So there's definitely opportunities there to attract new businesses moving forward if we can get a secondary water supply. Using the Lake Springfield Watershed Committee, again, I've talked about that, improving the lake water quality. That's an opportunity to continue with, as well as further improving safety. Rate restructuring, desensitizing our revenues to weather, that's important. Just like we did with the electric side, we're eventually going to need to do the same thing with water. Threats is the cost of the supplemental water supply option. As the longer we wait through the years, if we would have built the lake, let's say, as an option back in the 60s and 70s, it would have been much, much cheaper. There would have been fewer regulations that really require us to do more than what's really beneficially necessary. Main breaks. That's a big threat. We've had a lot of cold weather, and there's been a lot of main breaks this year. I think we've had 44 this month so far. High efficiency fixtures, basically that's reducing revenues, but at some point, all the infrastructure, all the facilities, I guess you might say, in the city of Springfield, all the homes, eventually it'll flatten out. Extended drought, loss of revenue from water restrictions. That means we're suppressing, usage because we're charging more. So what that results in is lower revenue. And then delayed state payments. The state is still behind in their payments, although they did make a payment here recently of $4.6 million. So they've made some payments due to some of our prodding to them to make some payments. So we're hoping that they will continue that to get caught up. On to the electric. You can see our expenses here. Our commodities are our biggest. Really, that's fuel, coal. So that's the majority of our expenses there, followed up by labor, then our debt service. And here you can see some of the variances that we have. And I really want to call attention to the total amounts between last fiscal and this fiscal, where last fiscal, we came under budget by $5 million in surplus. So we actually cut quite a bit out of the budget. We're coming under that budget by another $4.2 million, basically. And that's really because of the drop in capacity payments or capacity revenue and wholesale revenues that we're experiencing for this next fiscal. Now, looking at revenues, you can see most of our revenues are coming from retail, a little bit with wholesale sales. And the variances there, you can see that where we're at, and the biggest drop is wholesale sales, which also contains our capacity component as well. You can see that we also have the EIRF in here, which we'll talk just a little bit more later, but you can see that those numbers in there that we have, that's a newer number that we have for this year's budget. And the reason it's negative is because that's restricted fund. We can't access that. That's why we're backing it out. Director, when you have an acronym, can you tell us what the acronym stands for, please? It's the Environmental and Regulatory Initiatives and Rebate Fund. Thank you. On to our vehicle list. We have a lot of different items on here for some of our aging equipment. I won't read them all off, but all of these items, they're needed. We did try to cut back in areas where we thought that they could get by another year. Projects for T&D, line clearance, that's tree trimming. That's very important to reduce the number of outages, especially when storms arise. I'm sure you've all experienced phone calls when power's out, and one of our one of our strengths is to keep our outage durations and frequency of outages down. The other ones are underground rebuilds for various areas, reconductoring. We do have the Ash Street underpass in here now as an item where actually last year it was more of a grant, but we're not going to get that grant now, so we're going to have to use that and I guess internally fund that. One of the bigger items that we want to talk about is the solar farm. We've got $1.2 million in here for that. That is actually going to be a system that's probably it's over a half a megawatt for what we're expecting. And we want to accomplish out of this is to get our staff exposed to the technology and understand it. That way we're ready for the future. We want to start getting engaged into a community solar program where our customers can subscribe and pay for solar panels. But we think that we need to be there first as far as understanding what those costs are and how to maintain the systems and work on those systems. Street lighting that we have, some different areas, and then also some developer paid projects. One of the ones we have in here every year is MISO transmission projects. That's a cost to us. That's been increasing over the years. And the difference is that, like for investor-owned utilities, they can automatically recover those rates, where we cannot. We just absorb that cost. And that's what this is basically it's socializing the cost of wind power going, providing it from the west and transmitting it to the east. Another big item is our integrated resource plan. So basically an IRP is going to look at our entire generation fleet and determine which units are going to be retired, which units are going to be upgraded for compliance. So if the unit's going to be retired, it could be looking at replacement for a new gas turbine. It could be looking at renewables, buying power off the grid. And depending on what units are retired, there might be transmission upgrades that are required. But it's basically a 20-year look at our generation and how we're going to move forward. What's the best decisions there? And you're actually probably going to expect an ordinance probably within the month for that. We're also restructuring staff. That way we can actually do a better job going forward of resource planning. Power plant projects that are on the books is a controls upgrade for Dolman and Interstate. We also have fly ash engineering fees, so basically looking at dry fly ash for Unit 33. We want to start moving that forward. Unit 33 scrubber hydroclones. It's basically reducing our water usage in the scrubber. And then also some miscellaneous groundwater and landfill studies. Some bigger items for the electric side is in the future is a dispatch corporate data center. So our dispatch center is basically within inches of the high-speed rail take. So it doesn't qualify for all that work, but it's something that there's structural issues with the building that are going to occur with it being that close to the railroad tracks due to vibrations. And the building is not a hardened building. So if there's a storm, a severe storm, like a tornado, we could have some major impacts to that, as well as the corporate data center, which is in the basement of this building, can result in having flooding issues. So we want to move those facilities to another location, and we're expecting that to be $6 to $10 million. I mean, it could be more, but those are just some initial estimates. Some ISD infrastructure is about $1.2 million. That's basically for replacing existing network switches, communication networks for us. They're just aging and they need to be replaced. The ELG rule for the effluent limitation guidelines, right now that rule's up for reconsideration. So we don't know for sure what's going to happen with that rule. But if it stays as is, we would be required to build a new treatment facility that basically provides no environmental benefit, because our discharge to the sanitary district is what we do after we treat it, and then their discharge basically meets all of the regs. So there's no environmental benefit. I guess you could say the constituents in their water at that point are non-detect, basically. So there's really no issue, but except for the way the rule is written would affect us to do that. The CCR rule is really governs dry ash and the ash ponds, and we're following this rule, and we're going to follow compliance for it. But it will basically result in the closure of the ash ponds. And we don't really know for sure exactly what the cost will be. It depends on what options we choose. But the IRP, which is the Integrated Resource Plan that we're looking at, will actually tell us what units should be upgraded and what units should be retired. So we'll be able to throw that component into it as well. And then along with compliance, then we have the Environmental Regulatory Initiatives Rebate Fund. Again, kind of going that in here is that we're asking for a portion of that for this fiscal to go towards the fly ash silo for the engineering part of it. And then the fund balance that's in that fund right now is $13.4 million. So what we did was, I don't know if everybody recalls, but basically it was the settlement of the wind contracts that dropped another $8 million into that fund. And this is the fund that basically that you aldermen will decide on what you want to do with that. You know, if we have environmental compliance issues, that's where it's supposed to go. But if we don't have that, then you can rebate it back to the customers. Some of the strengths that we have for the electric, we're long on generation, so we have enough to cover our load and help with market exposure. Stuff we've talked about before, but rate restructuring, our bond ratings improving, reducing our coal price for 5 years, our investments in pollution controls in the past. One of our biggest ones, though, that we love to tout is our low number of outages, for our customers, our fast outage response times. We do our customers a great service. Our linemen are really, they do spectacular work. They're out there in the roughest conditions doing this work. The strong safety commitment that we have on the electric side as well, and then our improving cash position. Weaknesses, lack of specialized rates. We just don't have that ability right now to help draw in businesses, I think, to the community. Limited resources for capital projects, delayed state payments again. Our excess generation, it's a strength, but it could also be a weakness because when the market conditions are low, we're not drawing in those wholesale dollars. Just as the capacity market went away, that's now a weakness where it was a great strength. Opportunities is taking advantage of those increases when they occur to the market. Further safety improvement, shielding our customers from rising energy prices. And with that, in that is really deciding on what we're going to do with our generation. If we retire those units and we decide to build new generation, we're still shielding our customers. So there's a lot of opportunity to be had in the future with our generation. Revised specialty rates, we get into wanting to attract businesses with high load factor and economic incentives. We think that will provide value with that, and we want to do that this spring. We've done a lot of changes through these. We also want to make sure that we have certain customers that aren't subsidizing other customers. So that's really where the distributed energy resource rates come into play. Some of our threats really is the load decline. It's a national trend. It keeps continuing. The EPA regulations, there's a lot of activity, with the Trump administration, but we don't know exactly how that's going to pan out. So if things take too long, they could change again. But the continuous change is what makes things very difficult to plan. Employee loss to competitors, we lose linemen, we lose dispatchers, we lose engineers to competitors for compensation issues. Restructuring MISO capacity auction, I've talked about that, the changes in the capacity market. I don't know if it's really going to be further issues with that because it's pretty low right now. I don't know if it can get any lower. One of the other items I kind of wanted to touch on, just because it's been a kind of a hotter topic as of late, is for security for the utility. Just kind of want to kind of give everybody an overview of what they do. They patrol our parks, our facilities, so they open and close buildings, road control. They tow boats, remove debris, search and recovery on the lake. They maintain the buoys. They have no arresting authority, though. They can only write citations against the code. What we do is work with Homeland Security, the FBI, NERC, and CERC, basically to maintain the best practices for the utility, and we've been doing that for many, many years, actually. DNR, which is the Department of Natural Resources for Illinois, and the Springfield Police Department, they also patrol the lake, and we're currently down 3 officers for actually various reasons. Some of the strengths that we have is knowledge of the lake and the lake property, the experience of our guards that have been around, the quick response to the lake related to emergencies, events, strong relationships that we have with DNR and the other various agencies, as well as the conduits, the points of contact that we have with NERC and FERC and the Department of Homeland Security. One of the other big items is visibility that we have in the parks and around the lake and on our property. Weaknesses, though, lack of training. We want to improve that. The aging equipment that we have, we're understaffed. Again, we're down 3 officers, and we've been down prior. We hired more, and then we had some other issues that were, one of them applied for a police department, one resigned, and we're back down again, so we're trying to get more hired. Large patrols on the lake and basically limited patrols on the water are of issue. Opportunities. We do bring in some revenue from boat licenses. We are hiring 2 officers right now. Updated technology, so we're trying to install more cameras, do some improvements. Utilize the Springfield Police Department for training. Improving our perimeter security, which is currently being done. And also, tap into our local resources, continue to do that. That's going to be important. The threats, retirement of experienced staff, and then unprotected assets, which really every utility has with substations and electric poles. You just can't, post guards at every facility that you have throughout the city. Questions?
Thank you, Director, for your presentation. I know it's pretty lengthy. A lot of things that go into it. I'm sure there's going to be some discussion about that here in a few minutes, but I wanted to talk about a couple of safety issues around the lake that I've been concerned with, and I've heard from the Homeowners Association, and I sit on the Lake Council. The maintenance of the buoys at the lake is basically nil. It's nothing to it, and we need to, for the CWLP committee meeting that we're going to have next month, I'd like for you to bring me a plan on what we're going to do about the buoy situation, because it's a very expensive endeavor, and we need to start a program about rotating how much money we're going to spend on the replacement of the buoys, because the ones we have are completely outdated and they don't work, and we're putting ourselves in a culpable situation to the point where we're going to be sued pretty soon for all the damage that we're getting from boats running into docks and that kind of things, and the low water areas. In addition to that, the bridge lighting is not being maintained properly and needs to be another consideration for what we're going to talk about next month. I see where you list one of our strengths of bringing in boat license fees, but if you set out on the docks like I do during the summer, because I'm out there every day, you'll see that we have several dozens and maybe even hundreds of boats that come into the lake that do not have any licenses, and we don't have any license enforcement. So that's got to be a priority next year. It would take hiring maybe summer help to go out and set on those ramps and make sure that we put somebody out there to maintain that, because there's people that are coming in from out of the city and even outside the state, and they don't pay for any kind of fees. Those are the 2 issues I'd like for you to make sure you bring to me next month for the CWLP committee meeting, if you would, please. One other thing, the water situation at the Capitol, they're talked about, what is it,
Legionella.
What's that do for us? How are we address? Is that part of our problem or is it their problem?
Well, with that, we're basically offered assistance to the state for any sampling help that they might need and just general technical discussion. We're part of several other agencies that have volunteered to assist them. I believe that building has not been occupied since like 2008. So there might be some serious issues with that, but we don't know. We don't know what is going on inside their building.
It's not something that's in our system. It's because of the building.
Well, that's usually typically found in hot water systems where the temperature of the water is warmer, and that can develop that. And those kinds of things. And what we know of is that the traces of organic matter may be dead or may be alive. They don't even know that yet. They just did this quick test, and it's going to take a couple weeks for them to really get the final results back as well.
Ted can answer this question. I believe it's dealing with the piping within the structure. It's not within the water supply of CWLP.
Yes, it's in their hot water piping is where they come.
And it's limited to the Armory building?
Pardon me?
It's just limited to the Armory building?
They tested other buildings and had that rapid test, which doesn't tell whether the genetic material is live or dead.
Okay.
But spread via vapor, it's correct?
That's correct.
That's all I have, Director. Thank you.
Alderman Dowling?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I just have a few questions. But first, I thought it would be helpful. We talk about the pilot all the time, which is, of course, is payment in lieu of taxes. It's money that's transferred from the electric fund and the water fund over to the corporate fund. But could you, you or one of your staff, just in a real simple way, because I get this question all the time, explain how it works. How is the dollar amount determined?
The dollar amount for the actual pilot is determined off a percentage, and it's changed through the years. If you go back through the history,
Right.
You can see that there's been increases through the years on the percentage. Right now, it's 3.35%, and then next year it'll go up to 3.75%
3 point
off of operating revenues,
Okay, it's on just revenues.
just revenues.
Doesn't have anything to do with like the net. In other words, if we were to cut expenses dramatically, it doesn't impact the pilot.
Correct.
Okay, that's I think an important. I just wanted to put that out there. That's what I remembered, and thank you for clarifying that.
Yes.
'Cause I'm wrong like on occasion.
If I could add to that.
Yeah.
Pilot is payment in lieu of taxes, and I think Chris Wise can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but we tied it within the bond covenants themselves, so it's more codified with regards to the restructuring. And when we refunded the bonds, wasn't it included in that language?
Yes, we amended the pilot ordinance when we restructured the electric debt and did the rate restructuring that set the percentage based off of audited operating revenues. It used to be, prior to that, it was percentage.
Can you speak into the mic?
Prior to that, it was a percentage of retail and also a percentage of wholesale. And those were different percentages. So it was month to month, we calculated it, and we sent the pilot payment to the corporate fund. Now, it's set at the beginning of the year based off of what our projected operating revenues will be, and then it's calculated at the end of the year after the audit, and we pay quarterly now. And it's subordinate in the debt service calculation. It's no longer considered an operating expense for compliance, but the rating agencies would still include it.
Well, and that's the other services that are here. So the pilot is subordinate, but not the free services or the shared services. So those would be considered into our debt service calculation.
And one of the things with the shared services, Corporation Counsel, like Tracy Johansson, her position wasn't fulfilled. And then previously, any assistance we had through HR or the mayor's office, Corporation Counsel in general, that's what the shared services accounts to. So there's a lot of time spent on the administration side with regards, especially with the restructuring of the rates, refunding of the bonds, the coal contract, and CWLP is reaping millions and millions and millions of dollars over that. And so our efforts, that's what it's calculated at. I don't know if Director McCarty wants to explain the shared services in any greater detail.
No, I think you summarized it very well. The whole point is to sort of follow the AP structure that we're implementing, where we're taking on the AP staff, and they're going to continue to pay a portion of that. Years ago, there used to be payroll and HR in the utility that came over and out of the utility into the corporate fund. And again, it's a shared services model that we're trying to move towards more throughout the city as a whole and incorporate the utility into that. So yeah, the mayor, you did a good job of explaining it. It's all about shared services and allocating costs that the utility, if they were a private entity, would have to bear on their own. They would have to go out, for instance, and hire their own attorneys, or they would have to engage the services of a private law firm, which would, of course, cost quite a bit of money. So it's a very similar concept.
Okay, thank you. My next question deals with specifically a budget page. If you look at Fund 102, 100, and then you look at line, it's under contractual services, 1233. I see in the notes, and I really appreciate you sending the notes to us, it talks about the...
You know what the page is, by chance?
It looks like on the budget book itself, 13 of 24, I believe. But it mentions that the Crystal Lake wind contract ends in November 2018, and I see where that line was decreased by $4.9 million. Is that pretty much solely from that wind contract going away?
It's the Crystal Lake.
No. That would be all purchase power expenses are flowing through there.
I can't hear you.
That would be all purchase power expenses flowing through there. It's not just Crystal Lake.
How much of the reduction is from the wind? Just ballpark it. I'm not going to hold you to it, Chris.
I'd say 12 or so million would be Crystal Lake.
And that
12 to 15.
And that purchase power number fluctuates from year to year based on engineering estimates. If we burn more coal, we buy less power. If we buy more power, we burn less coal. So if you see that there's a decrease in coal or natural gas, there'll be an increase in purchase power. It's based off of Miller Street's estimates for which units are going to get called, and if the prices are projected to be low enough, we buy instead of produce. So there's a lot that goes in that purchase power number.
I understand. I just see that line reduced by 15.7. That's wonderful. But I see where the category as a whole, total contractual services, only decreased by 1.4. How come with such a large decrease? Like, explain to me what increased and why in that category of contractual services.
Well, the biggest increase would be in 1205, and that's kind of the general all-in catch number or catch object code for the repairs at Dahlman. You'll have, I think, the 1205 line on that in the same grouping. In the notes, you'll see that there's several large dollar items. I think there's a $3.5 million increase in that line.
Right.
And we've labeled several increases over last year. For instance, there's NOx repairs, there's coal handling equipment repairs. There's several items in there that didn't happen last year that are happening this year.
Chris, so what you're saying is, I mean, and this is really what I wanted to get to, is that there's expenses there that have increased in capital expenditures that we cannot go without.
Yeah, I mean, those are basic operating expenses that
We are forced to do those improvements that you described.
Yes, if we're going to run the power plant, we have to do the repairs to the power plant.
Thank you. And then my final question, Mr. Chairman, is deals with, and I'm sorry, I didn't look at the, I have the notes. What it says is,
That's it right there.
there's a on one section, there's a $72,000 relocate ISD, and then I think it's probably a sister line later on that says it's in 102, 300, 2305.
Page 18, 2305.
It says relocate commercial office in Municipal Center West. That seems like that's a significant those are significant dollar amounts, and we have an $11.5 million budget. I know this is not part of the corporate fund, but just wanted to ask what that's all about, because I hadn't heard of it before.
Well, that's kind of what Mark was talking about earlier, too, with the one-stop shop. We're taking our commercial offices, some of the ones down there, and moving them to the third floor, moving ISD up to the third floor, and then moving the Public Works down to the first floor. from the third floor. So with that, there's going to be probably some abatement work on the third floor with asbestos. We're assuming that the tile and the floors, I think that it's the mastic that's there is asbestos, so that has to get removed before, and then we got to do all the work to further recarpeting before we can move into there. Because we're going to have to actually relocate some of the cubicles in that area to make room for everyone.
And I appreciate the concept of the one-stop shop. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I guess my next question I was just going to go to the budget director, because if CWLP is spending this much and Public Works is involved, are any corporate funds involved with this potential transfer?
No.
So no corporate funds at all?
That's not the plan right now, although we are still waiting to get the final plan and cost estimates. Director Mahoney might have some insight on that.
Well, and the reason I ask is I don't disagree with the concept. I want it to be as easy and as friendly an experience as possible for the public. But again, it's no secret that we have an $11.5 million hole, and any corporate fund dollars in particular that we can save. And so I guess the answer of what I heard you say is you don't know yet. And I would just urge that if any corporate funds are involved, that we consider delaying that, because we need to save every single dollar we can find, and we need to scrape and scrimp and try to find monies. So.
Alderman, what I can say is that right now we do not anticipate using any corporate funds for that move and for the projects that would need to be done here in order the walls, any of that stuff. We would not plan to use corporate fund.
So, Director, under the Public Works budget, in the 2305 line under the sewer surplus, the remodeling and renovations, the $125,000, that's not for the move?
If it's in the sewer line, I doubt it, because sewer's not here in this building.
Okay, so that's not, okay.
We'll have Director Mahoney clarify it.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Doug.
Alderman Hanna.
Thank you. I got one thing that struck me on the shared services thing, and believe me, I work for CMS at the state, and moves are expensive. A lot of times they're not necessary. We end up buying new desks and things that, quite frankly, we could use others. That concerns me. CWLP did all the EDP for years for the corporate side too. Did you guys ever charge CWLP or ever charge the corporate for the EDP stuff?
I think, maybe back early on, from what I've been told, is that there was twos and froms, like at the end of the year for shared services, basically. And then along came the pilot ordinances at some point, I don't know, in the 2000s maybe.
Right.
Where they basically said, you're not doing that anymore. You're just going to do a pilot number, and that's it. And then everything else, you're also going to, pay for all the ISD services permanently, as well as street lights and everything. They codified everything. So yeah, in the past, I think that stuff was paid for. They changed the method of it when they introduced the pilot ordinance.
Alderman Hanna, just for clarification, what's the EDP you're speaking of?
The data processing unit.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if that's the acronym that they use, but it's a computer.
ISD.
We refer to it as ISD.
Yeah.
What's the ISD? What do you call your ISD? What is that?
Information Systems Division,
And it's
I
the
believe.
same thing as the EDP?
It's computer technologist or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
I think
I'm
the
sorry.
state calls it IT, right?
Yeah.
Chris, if you could get into the mic more, it's not picking your voice out.
We call it ISD,
So-
the state calls it IT.
I thought I heard you say the pilot doesn't affect the debt ratio, right?
Correct.
But this payment to the shared services or whatever you want to call it, that will affect your debt ratio, correct?
It's an operating expense, yes.
And how's the bond houses going to like that?
They would view it as an increase in a transfer.
And I guess the reason why I ask is we worked hard, and Mayor is under your direction to really try to get the CWLP electric and all that in good financial shape. And my concern is that we've already been notified by the bond agencies that they're watching us. And to me, wouldn't it be better, we're raising the, next year we're raising the pilot, correct?
Correct.
Why don't, instead of doing the shared services model, do we not just bring the pilot, move it up this year, and then maybe they won't. My concern is once we start dipping into the cash till, we're going to continue to dip in it, and when we need more money, we'll just take another body out of there and take more money from CWLP. And I think, in my opinion, I think it is a very dangerous thing to do. I think the pilot works. We should go with that model, and I just don't. I'm afraid of the bond houses and what their thoughts are. I think this is a very slippery slope that we're going down.
I guess I could answer that. Corporation Counsel can give you the legal terms. The reason that you cannot move the pilot ahead is because exactly what you said. That would alarm the bond houses with regards to that. Really, this is a shared services model. Director McCarty can explain it. It meets GFOA standards or GASB standards better with regards to that. So it's typical operations. So like I said, they're down an attorney who's doing the work. Corporation Counsel is doing a lot cheaper. And so that's what you have to take a look at. And so that's it's within the accounting standards. But Director McCarty can speak to the accounting standards. The Corporation Counsel can speak to the legal matters. I can speak from a policy decision. That's definitely within the realm because, believe me, I've spent a lot of time on CWLP, and if I was getting paid what they did, my salary's frozen at $130,000. Look at their salaries. It's a lot more than the mayor makes. But I've paid my dividends that saved them millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, what's your days of cash today?
Water or electric?
Electric.
Electric? Right around 40 days.
40 days. And the goal was within 5 years, 60 days of cash. And already within 2 years, probably, we've reached 40 days of cash. That's because of our changes that we did collectively. So it's within the realm. I mean, that's what you have to go by, is what the rating agencies will look at. Does it meet the GASB standards? Does it meet the legal standards? And the answer is yes. But Corporation Counsel can, defend that part. Bill McCarty, Director McCarty can defend the GASB part, but it's within the realm. So that's when we did cut a position in Corporation Counsel. So that's what the trade-off is. What is the trade-off? So we can start hiring people at CWLP, and God knows what the salaries will end up being. And so it's not nearly what we're paying some of our attorneys, I guarantee you that. But Director McCarty, if you'd speak to the GASB standards.
Well, just a couple points. I figured this would come up tonight, but wanted to talk about, first of all, pilot versus the cost allocation, because it really is two separate things. The pilot is payment in lieu of taxes. It's for intents and purposes taxes that the utility pays, right? We can all pretty much agree on that. And let me just give you a hypothetical. So Alderman Hanauer, you pay taxes, you pay income taxes, you pay sales taxes and property taxes, right?
Yes, sir.
If somebody tripped in your front lawn and sued you and you need an attorney, because you pay taxes, does that entitle you to go to Jim Zirkle and have him and his staff defend you?
No.
Utilities, the same concept. They need attorneys. If they were a private entity, they would go out and they would either hire those attorneys or they would engage the services of a private firm. Either way, they would pay a lot of money for it. In this particular case, they're not doing that. They're utilizing city attorneys, and they're paying a pro rata portion of those expenses to do it. So the pilot is separate. It's a tax, whereas the legal services and the other ones are a service that they would otherwise pay for, whether they were on their own completely independent, either as a public entity by themselves or as a private entity out there. They would be paying for payroll. They would be paying for legal services. They would be paying for, the mayor is the de facto general manager. They haven't had a general manager since two administrations ago. The mayor is the de facto general manager. He spends a lot of time on that. So when you think about it in those concepts, it's very important to make sure that you understand or realize, and I know you do, that these are two different things we're talking about, a tax versus services that are being provided. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, and I'll provide this to you, is we have a report every 2 years. The American Public Power Association does a report. And in this particular report, they talk about the contributions that public utilities make to their communities. And the latest one we have is from 2014, data from 2014, and I think this report came out in 2016. The average or the median amount contributed to their local community for a power plant, electric plant, over $100 million in revenues is 6%. The current pilot, as it stands, and this would, I believe, include the services, which is part of the pilot. It's cash plus services. This report clearly states that that's very common, that it's not just the city of Springfield. Services are often used as part of the pilot, and we're no different. But as it is today, I think the pilot is somewhere around 5%, maybe a little bit higher. And again, the median being 6% of operating revenues. So even if the average is 5.6, by the way, across all revenue levels. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that pilot and the cost allocation were all together and lumped together. Even if that were the case, that would bring the utility somewhere up around that 5.6% median of all revenue levels of public utilities across the country. And again, for those over 100 million, the median is 6%. So in response to your concern about the bond houses, two things I'll say. One is we're not doing anything that other public utilities and communities aren't doing across the country. And in fact, from a metric standpoint, we're doing better because we're getting less from the utility. So that would, I think, assuage some concerns.
Director McCarty, with all due respect, could you get back to the mayor's original question?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
I understand what you're doing, but I want to get back to the original question. Director McCarty, I want to get back to the original question, please, if you would address the mayor's concern, please.
The answer is yes, Mayor. It's within the allowable
OASB
constraints of standards.
Thank you.
If I could,
Yes,
two numbers, if Chris Wise or Ken Crutcher has it. We'd like to know what the debt service ratio, the percentage was when we came into office and what it is today, and then the days of cash when we came into office and what it is today for the electric side.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my questions would be right along those lines. The problem is that with the shared services and what we're doing, have they projected, using this budget as written, what it will do to the debt ratio and the days of cash?
Sure. Yes, the budget, as part of the budget, we calculate a projected debt service.
Okay, so I guess after you answer the mayor's question, if you could answer mine of what the projected change will be with the new costs.
To answer the mayor's question, the electric fund was at zero or negative. I mean, let's be honest, back when he took office, before the rate restructuring, and the debt service ratio would have been below the compliance level, so it would have been right at 1.25 with the rebate back from the corporate fund that almost cut the pilot payment in half that year. Right now, through November, the electric fund coverage before the pilot payment, which is what our compliance number is 2.13. And our cash is, like I said, 40 days. And it would have, so it's gone from basically 0 to 40 days. And what was your question, Alderman? I'm sorry.
With the shared services lines in the current budget, if everything, and I know nothing ever goes as planned, but if you were to use the FY19 requested budget numbers and treat them like they were FY19 finals, what would that do to those numbers?
Within the presentation that Director Brown presented, it was 1.72, and that includes the service payments as operating expenses.
Mr.
Well
Chair,
above the
can I-
compliance of
Yes,
1.25.
1.25.
Alderman Hanauer and then Alderman Redpath.
I wasn't through with my questioning, so I just, the solar field for 1.2 million, and you said it was a half of a megawatt?
It's going to be a little bit above that. It's probably going to be like a 600 to 700 kW system, depending upon, what's actually installed.
And
Through an RFP.
How does that equate to what our cost for energy is on a megawatt? How will that? I don't see.
Well, yeah, solar power is definitely more expensive, as an option. Again, the $1.2 million is really for us to get into that technology and start moving forward with that and develop a solar subscription process in the future where our customers are deciding themselves if they want to do that. So but we got to get there first. It's kind of a baby step, you might say. It's an initial investment to go down that path. But they are going to be, they will pay more for that service than what they pay now.
Now, I'm going to cut my question short, but there's a lot of big engineering contracts that I saw in the budget, and then those will all be going out for bid, I assume. $2.5 million engineering contract for it's in your. There's a bunch of them in there.
Well,
I just want to make sure that
like the fly ash silo one, they went to like 3 different engineering firms and got proposals, and they looked at those and then determined which ones are really the best option. It depends on what we're looking at. There's some, there might be a certain engineering firm that's really a specialty firm that you're not going to go out and get multiple bids from because it's a professional service. But even as a professional service, there's some projects you would say that we feel that any engineering firm can do, and we're going to get multiple proposals brought back to us so we can evaluate them on a technical basis as well as cost.
Okay. And then finally, the only other thing, and I'm just going to leave it at this. We were talking about the shared services and the stuff going over to the. I'll just use Mr. Zirkle's office. That office is stretched thin as it is. We can't get things out of there. And you've got a major, my concern is you've got a major corporation here. They're a major corporation. And you're expecting a group that can't get things out for the rest of the part. I know he gets them out for you, but we wait quite a while.
Weeks.
And how do we expect them to give, and this is just an example, to give them the attention, this major corporation that they need? That's my concern. I'm done.
That's valid, but the proof's in the pudding. I wouldn't trade Zirkle for anybody. I don't care who you hire. And that's who led us through the rate restructuring, the bonds, the coal contract. So, there's a price that you would pay for that lack of talent. And so, like I said, you can change it.
But we can
change it.
Mayor, it's the rest of the.
Take that right out. I think that was about $250,000.
But it's going to affect the rest of the city too. It's not just affecting them. It's affecting
but if you want
the
to
rest
change
of the
it,
city.
you have that prerogative. This is my budget. I think this is the best approach moving forward. But by all means, you can change it where you give them put it back in, subtract out $250,000 within the corporate fund and move that direction. That's your prerogative. So that doesn't bother me. What I'm telling you is why we did what we had done. And so I guess I'd ask, what was the last general manager's salary? Because Director McCarty brought up a valid point. What was the last general manager's salary at the utility?
Yeah, it would have been between 100 and 130. Would have been Todd Renfro was the last GM at the utility.
Plus benefits. So I'm double dutying it right now. And, you know, with the escalation, it's probably a lot more than that. So that's a point I just want to make, because, you know, you think that we're taking from the till or what have you, but there's a cost for that time, that commitment, that expertise, and it's proven in the numbers. We went from 0 days of cash to 40, which all of you should take credit for. That wasn't, you couldn't have hired an attorney to make that happen. You couldn't have hired a general manager to make that happen. You have to have the administration and the council's support to move forward in that direction, and we all should be taking thanks for that. And so this is a logical chance, or not even a chance, this is logical practice with regards to shared services. They do it with other funds. I mean, so this isn't out of the norm. You're acting like it's out of the norm. This is not out of the norm. So, you know, we did it. This council took action when it was upside down. When the corporate fund had money, what did we do? You let the CWLP keep the funds, if I remember correctly, the pilot of $4 million. And so that was the reverse. So now we're in reverse roles, and now the shoe's on the other foot, but we won't take the action to correct the corporate fund budget and take those steps that need to be corrected. And what we're talking about right now is just provide daily services. We're not talking about pensions, and we're not talking about equipment and things of that nature. This is just putting a Band-Aid approach on it. What we did for the utility, we corrected the financial ship. And now the shoe's on the other foot, and we should be doing the same thing for the corporate fund instead of shooting holes in it, and when it makes sense. But you have that prerogative. You can go ahead, and we're going the wrong direction, but there's going to be an explanation to the constituents when we're not providing the services that everybody wants on a day-to-day basis. Because we did take the corrective action, and we heard about the ratepayers, about the utility and how high the rates were, but we took that heat and we did what was right. And that's what we're trying to push through in this budget, is do what's right. Let's correct that structural deficit that we have in the corporate fund. And hopefully we have at least 5 leaders on this council to get it done.
Alderman DeCenzo.
My questions are quick. 2, the first one being, will the quarterly committee meetings replace the public meetings that the mayor has?
No.
No. Okay, so there will be 3 additional public meetings.
That's up to the mayor. The committee meetings are going to be held quarterly as we planned.
Yeah, I would say it would, and it just depends on, you know, that open mic night. That's what it should be, is an open mic night. I think that's why I pushed it forward in that direction. So we'll see how it goes, and, you know, if we don't believe, just, I'm going to get on my soapbox tonight.
Don't ride too long.
No, it's going to be real quick. This tells the history of CWLP and why the public is frustrated. They handed out their handouts. I didn't even get one. And so they weren't even prepared to give everybody a handout. And so that tells you have to ask for the information. What we're doing is opening up the doors. Let's have the open discussion. That's what the committee is for. And if that doesn't fill that role, then we'll have additional public forums.
Okay.
That's what we want to do, is we're here to serve the public as best as possible, and we're going to move forward with that integrative resource plan because it's what we need to do to move forward in a positive direction with regards to utility. And that's how they got upside down in the past. So we're correcting that. Thanks to the council, you took that positive action. We did that work, but it's not over with. We have to look at Dahlman 31, 32. When do those come off? 33. When does that come off? And then the ash ponds and everything else. And so that's where we have to go towards. So if the committee meeting doesn't handle that, then we'll have the public forums that fill the gap.
Alderman DeCenzo, continue.
Okay, so we said no. You two said no.
Mayor's got a point. We'll work through this.
Okay. And he kind of brought in my other point, my other question too. Alderman Hanauer brought it up in the last meeting that, you know, we're constantly spending lots of money for repair, for upkeep. You know, how long are we going to continue to do this before we decide to take something offline or that it's no longer useful? You know, we get emergency passages for large expenditures all the time. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around what is the life expectancy going forward? You know, what are we doing? What's the plan?
Well, that's what the integrated resource plan is going to look at. So when we have that, that's going to tell us that basically that for 31 and 32. when do those need to be retired? Are they profitable or not? What's the amount of other compliance dollars that may be needed for upgrades? It would look at turbine overhaul costs to say that, okay, within so many X years, you're going to have that expense, then they need to be retired before that time. So that's what they're looking at.
No
And it goes for all our generations, so not just the coal-fired power plants. It would include Unit 4, the new unit. It would include interstate gas turbine, everything.
Wasn't that supposed to be done at the end of the year? When can we expect that?
Well, so once we get that in place, the proposal, if we can get that within the next month, then they're estimating about 6 months for that.
Alderman Tylen.
Yes. Chuck, did you want to go ahead and go first?
No, I'll
Skip
wait.
Chuck.
I didn't see you. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Sit right next to me.
Alderman Tylen.
All right. I have a few questions that, as public figures, when we're out and about, people stop us and ask questions, and they know it's budget season. A few things that I just want to get out publicly. Doug, I did talk to you about a couple of these already. Number one, there is a misconception among members of the public right now that with the new tax rules and laws that happened, that CWLP was getting a huge tax break and they should be passing that on to the ratepayers. Nothing that passed Congress with this tax reform affected CWLP other than their personnel.
Correct.
So there is no corporate, energy, anything, tax reductions on CWLP. They're still paying the same rates that they paid last year, the year before, and the year before that.
Correct, yes.
And I just want the public to understand that.
The tax that CWLP pays is state utility tax, which is, we collect it and then pass it right back to the state.
Right. So I just want the people to understand there is no, CWLP is not seeing a huge windfall from this, and it's nothing that can get passed on to the constituents. Secondly, there are a small group of people who are very passionate about the beach. And I know we've addressed this year after year after year. The way I understand it and the way I explain it to people is that the water over there is so toxic that we are not really able to. The last we understood, we had the goose issue. We had some other issues. It's at the point where it's cost prohibitive to reopen the beach.
Well, yeah, I would agree. It's really cost is an issue. I mean, the water fund is already, as you know, kind of showing you that revenues are declining. So it's really, I mean, if we want to, raise rates to pay for that service, that's something that could be done by the city council. But it is a big expense for that, as well as risk.
Okay, and then one of the other points that was brought up, and this was a recent one, is the fire chief has talked about this Class 1 rating and how it should help affect the community in a positive way when it comes to insurance rates. I had an insurance person actually call me and ask whether or not the city has looked into whether or not it will reduce the insurance costs specifically at CWLP, because he said for the most part that people are only going to really notice if it's a commercial policy.
That's right.
Initial actually request into that to the insurance company said that we wouldn't receive any reduced cost for that.
Okay,
that they don't recognize that.
Like I said, it was just someone who's in the field who called, and he said that most people, he said he wanted me to, ask the question whether or not it would actually affect the utility, because he thought, in his opinion, commercial rates are going to be the only ones that are really affected by the change from a Class 2 to a Class 1, and he thought that the utility might see the best out of it. So I don't know if maybe we just didn't ask the right question or if it's just something we're
We'll follow up again.
Okay. Then one other point that you made, and then I'll get on to the actual budget questions. You said we have the second lowest water rates in the state. And I'd like to make that point to where the media and the other people pay attention to this. Somehow, conversation starts with, we're paying too much for water. We're getting, and I look right at her and I say, ma'am, as far as I understand, I believe we have the lowest water rates in central Illinois, if not downstate. And now tonight in the presentation, you say that we are number 2 in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, minus the Chicago area.
Minus Chicago area. So I just want to make the point to the public that even with everything we've done with the water department, your water rates are number 2 in the downstate area, south of Chicagoland, and you have some of the lowest water rates in the area. And one other lady pointed out one thing, and it's a question about, for the water department, for a way to branch out and possibly make more money. She grabbed a bottle of water off the shelf, and I'm going to use the one that's right here in front of me as an example. Sources: private water supply, Red Boiling Springs, Tennessee, and/or public water supply, Red Boiling Springs, Lafayette, and/or Salina, Tennessee. A number of the bottle of waters are municipal water out of Michigan, out of Indiana, out of Ohio. And I believe a few years ago, your predecessor said that we came in 3rd in a regional taste test on water.
What's your point, Alderman?
My point is that as a possible way for revenue, this constituent was saying, why aren't we bidding for some of these and sell more water?
We don't have it right now. It's 6 foot down.
It would be an added expense, and we'd have to create a new division to do that. Now, move on to your budget, please.
I'm just asking the questions that were asked to me.
Yeah, have you ever looked at bottling CWLP water?
We did look at that, and we talked to Pepsi about it. The setup cost is very expensive for us.
As long as we don't call it CWLP water.
And remember, I think you can answer this, Doug or Ted. For the lowest rate, that's Springfield residents. What about Holes in the Donut or any of the others? I don't know how that crosses the lines.
Well, the Springfield residents are the municipal owners, so that's who we're representing, that's who elect us. So, on your 1102 lines, I noticed that they're pretty, for the most part, you're staying pretty close to FY18 budgeted. What are the vacancies and total head count at Water and Electric Division? I did not see that in the presentation.
Overall head count last year was 614. This year it's 615.
For which division?
That's the entire CWLP.
Entire CWLP. Can you?
Water department is down 2 from last year, went from 76 to 74.
Okay.
The electric division, that's engineering operations, went last year from 370 to 369.
Okay. And the actual current vacancies that we'd be looking at posting at either water and electric?
$44 vacancies.
44 vacancies total? Okay. And then,
Alderman, do you want the other divisions too, besides electric and water, finance, regulatory affairs?
those are usually lower. It's most of the hires are in either 101 or 102. So now, between the FY18 and the FY19, we had union increases and other things. It doesn't sound like we had that many positions eliminated, and we don't have that many vacancies. I believe last year we passed for, in the budget, we left room for non-union increases. What percentage did we give the non-union employees?
For this fiscal?
For the past fiscal.
Didn't give anything.
So there were no non-union raises at all?
No, that's not true. I mean, as far as like the COLA, there's no COLA.
No COLA.
But there was there's other raises, of course, yes.
Okay.
No across the board.
Actual or budgeted for 18 or 19?
18, and then going into 19, are we budgeting any? That was the follow-up question.
We are budgeting for 19, but we have no COLA increases for non-union employees in actual numbers for 18.
Okay, but we do have a COLA built in for 19, is what you're saying, in these numbers?
Yes, we would have to assume that to make sure we had dollars available to pay those increases, but we're not anticipating, but we have to budget for it.
You would have the budgeted amount, but that's not saying that it will pass?
Correct.
Okay. There was an item in You talked about some of the different things. Alderman Donnellan hit a number of the ones that I was looking at. On page 3, 2303, land relocation, you brought up how the notes say that that is for Lake 2 land purchases. 1.6 was budgeted in 18, but nothing spent. 2.7 million budgeted for this year. If that's not spent, will that, basically, if that's not spent, that'll increase the cash position of the water?
No, because that would have been budgeted for bond proceeds last
Okay.
year too. We only would have done that if we issued bonds to pay for it.
All right. And then on the shared services, and I don't know if this is more for Mr. McCarty or for Mr. Crutcher, but would it be more beneficial to treat the shared services like we do the OPED budget, where we have a quarter of a person billed here and a half of a person billed there, and you actually built the 1,100 lines into CWLP as salary and personnel, rather than making it a budgeted line item of a shared services where it can be misinterpreted as a fee or a fine being paid to the corporate side?
I don't know that our payroll system can accommodate paying an employee out of multiple funds and multiple checking accounts.
Well, across departments is difficult. When you talk about OPEB, you're talking about the same funds within the same department. A little easier to do that. But the main issue you have here is the fact that the two payrolls are on opposite weeks. So corporate side is paid 1 week, one Friday, and then the following Friday is the utility. So that would be a major hurdle, and one of the reasons why it's set up the way it is in your books.
Okay. And then one of the things that jumped out at me in the presentation and in the notes is when we're looking at page 16, line 1247, under the shared services of 67,000, it said that it's 85% electric share of 50% of police commander salary and benefits of $79,000 total for training the CWLP employees. So $79,000 is the salary for the police commander. 50% of that is being charged to...
The 50% is the 79,000.
Okay, so 79 is the half, and that's salary and benefits then?
Correct.
Okay, so then 85% of the 79 is what the electric department's, and then the line in the water for the 15% is the other part.
Yes.
But what we're looking at is we're paying 79 in salary and benefits for an active duty police commander to be working with the 10 non-commissioned security guards at CWLP. Would we not be better off putting out for a contract hire where we could be hiring someone in who is a retired police officer or someone else who meets those qualifications to come in for $50,000 a year with no benefits? I mean, the federal government hires retired police officers to be security guards over here at the federal building all the time. Retired ISP, retired Secretary of State, retired Springfield PD. I'm just throwing that out there as an option to where we could leave the police commander working on actual police duties and put someone at CWLP who's focused on CWLP for less money.
Mm-hmm. That's something we could look at. I'm not sure how it would impact someone's pension. The other thing is, keep in mind that we have a commander right now that does the finances. And so that's why we moved that. You know, the financial part of it's going to OBM because they're the experts, and we're shifting that particular duties to security. So that made logical sense, but we can take a look at it if you guys would like.
And one of the other things on that line that I was wondering about is there are specialized police where, such as Secretary of State has their own, UIS has their own, Park Police has their own. I want to say, isn't Commerce Commission, the State Commerce Commission has their own. Could we, in theory, going forward, since you're talking about the fact that they can't make arrests, they can't do this, they can't do that, would we be better off looking going forward at possibly doing something like that with CWLP?
No, it was like that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, that's the cost. I mean, if you want 10 officers out there.
High
I mean,
cost, too.
it's
a liability.
It's not cost
Right.
prohibitive.
Well, I know that a lot of those, like park police is not paid as well as county or state or city. That's the only thing I was thinking, is that it may be a lower cost alternative. If it has already been looked into, that predates my time.
But if I could address the police structure, keep in mind, I should point out that the current administration, Doug Brown's done a great job turning that ship around, and that's thanks to the administration of CWLP. But that's what we're trying to change, is that culture. So you can bring someone in the outside. I'm not sure if it has that same impact that if you actually have Springfield Police Department overseeing it. That's the quality of service that I want out there. And to guarantee that, I think it's better under the direction of Springfield Police Department.
And my final question, Alderman Hanauer covered most of the items talking about the one stop and the other things, but I think the one thing that I didn't catch out of it is what are we looking at the total, all line items, what are we looking at a total cost for this potential move to the third floor, renovation, moving ISD, everything? Because you said there's 500 here, there's another amount over here and an amount over here. Do we have a total bill on that?
We don't. We're just budgeting money that we would maybe spend for us. You know, it depends upon what actual final moves are done. Public Works is kind of working that for the overall plan with the architect. So it depends, and I would assume that everything's gonna be done in phases, depending on how we move people, that kind of thing. So. I don't know where all the other, money might be budgeted, but for us, we've got ours budgeted for next fiscal for what we might spend. And we don't know the cost yet because none of it's been bid out or anything either.
Very good.
I will address that. The reason we're doing that is not only the one-stop shop, but you limit foot traffic going throughout the building. So from a security standpoint, but we're not married to the concept. So if Alderman, don't feel comfortable moving that direction this year, we're not going to lose any sleep over it.
And to the point that Alderman Hanauer said about CWLP being a major corporation, I'd just like the public to understand what we've been talking about tonight for the last hour and a half is a $305 million budget. We're not talking about something small. This is significant. This is not something that the aldermen take lightly. It's not something that the CWLP employees and staff take lightly. I know that there's a lot of CWLP employees who have a lot of pride in their job. Like you said, the linesmen who keep the power going as often as possible. You start talking about the outages, the broken water mains, and how quickly they respond. I think you guys take pride in your work, and I just want people to understand that this is a significant number.
Alderman McMiniman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doug, very positive presentation in terms of knowledge of issues and command of all the projects and trends and so forth. The SWOT analysis was very good, talking about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats, both on the water side and on the electric side. And the success of lowered accidents, that safety record is so impressive. That was eye-popping. I can remember 6 years ago, we had one accident alone, an independent contractor working at the power plant, and it cost us $2 million for one injury because there was some responsibility on our part at the power plant. So outstanding work on safety awareness and safety implementation. I've just got a couple of questions. I want to touch on what was discussed about the cost sharing. Mayor, you're doing the right thing there. In our code, you've got the authority to look at cost sharing and to make appropriate changes. Number two, there was some discussion about the pilot. Let's remember that on the pilot, when we built that new power plant and we created more generation capacity than what we needed for our native load, that was a new policy. We'd never done it before. And at the time, after the power plant was built, we redid the pilot on the assumption that we would have a whole bunch of wholesale sales. And if the wholesale sales had continued as we thought they would go, Our pilot today would be $20 million. Let's not forget that. So $8 million is what we're actually getting compared to the $20 million which we thought we would get when we built the new power plant. That's point number one. Now, point number two, payment in lieu of taxes. What would the real estate taxes be on a private entity if it was out at the lake on a $1 billion of plant and equipment and so forth? Just do the math. It would be about $20 million of real estate taxes alone. So I think our pilot is actually modest in comparison to those facts. So, Mayor, you're doing the right thing when you're trying to look at the sharing of services and trying to get a realistic number. That's one area of inquiry. Now, the other area of inquiry is what we get in our budget book is we get. And this is very well laid out. It's a very complex spreadsheet. It's 17 pages, and it's the 5-year capital plan for both water and electric. So, Doug, what I'd like your staff to do is go through that on the electric side, go through those 17 pages, and only about half of them are electric, and not for tonight, but to produce it for the council and for any members of the public that want to look at it. Go through that and identify in the projected spending for the capital plan any items that are associated with units 31 and 32 and total them up. We go out 5 years on that. I just total them up and just see where we stand. Just see what the potential spending is for capital spending on units 31 and 32, which are our two eldest coal-fired power plants. And then we've also got a 5-year operating and maintenance plan. Also, it goes 16 pages. It's a complex spreadsheet, and it goes out 5 years, projected spending, and do the same thing for it. Identify anything associated with units 31 and 32, and give us a spreadsheet and a total cost per fiscal year for those. And I think that'll just give us an idea of what we're looking at, an item that Alderman DeCenso raised, and this will give us some facts to look at. So outstanding presentation tonight, and keep up the good work.
And just to follow up with that, we'll do that, and the IRP that we're doing will indicate without a doubt, where we should be headed with our generation. So that's a good step forward.
Alderman Redpath.
My original question was about shared services, but the mayor answered part of that. There's one item I want to talk to you about, Director, that I missed on my first part was across your budget in different departments, you have a line item that's called service recognition. And last year you spent $162,650,000, and you're projected for the totals of those departments this year is at $168,700. What is service recognition? What's that mean? That's
basically a lot of the safety incentives that we do for all the employees, non-union and union.
So what does it mean? They get a cash bonus? Or is that?
There's cash bonuses basically in there for different levels. That's like in the union contracts. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head.
How's that distributed? Is it distributed by every individual person that works out there?
Right, yes.
Because I see there is a line item like that in the Public Works budget too, so theirs is obviously a lot less, but.
And I don't know if they have the same meaning necessarily either.
Okay, thank you.
From Public Works to us.
All right.
Alderman Proctor.
I think one thing that kind of gets missed when we always talk about the water and electric fund and stuff is, you guys have a pretty robust fiber optic network kind of throughout Springfield. Can you talk a little bit about that? Not to take too much time or anything, but I think it's something that kind of gets missed because everybody keeps, comparing other cities, like Google's doing stuff in, I think, Tennessee and other areas, like to bring high-speed internet to cities, and that's like the wave of the future. And we have had it for quite some time, and we've been utilizing it, I think. And I think there was some talk at time to maybe bring some private entity down to maybe expand their stuff, and I think there was some conversation on that, or maybe I'm wrong, but can you kind of explain what the fiber optic network we have in Springfield?
So really the fiber optic system really began because of our electric operations, and so we've got all our substations, all the power plants, our offices are all connected via fiber, and then slowly it expanded to like the District 186, going to other buildings, and then those entities pay us to run fiber to them. Some of the installations are more expensive because they're further out, but as we install more and more, then the cost becomes a little bit less to get that next person, you know. It's too expensive for residential, but for businesses, we've been somewhat successful in getting new ones. But AT&T and those type of companies are being very competitive, and they're undercutting our prices. So it's in the last couple of years, it's become more difficult in retaining customers and gaining new ones. But what we do offer that's a little bit different is the robustness of our system. So it's very, reliable the way it's connected with basically a ring around the city. So with multiple connection points makes it more reliable. Going forward to like a citywide type of thing where you have a gigabyte city kind of thing, that concept can be looked at. But really, I think that's kind of breaking away from the true nature of the electric division for what they're doing. And then it would create also a large capital outlay that I think you would need to do a study on and then look at, basically a separate division of the utility, a separate enterprise fund that would, be dedicated to that. And then, if it's profitable, it goes forward. If it's not, then you're done with it. I think, the city did like a study maybe 10 years ago on cable TV, and they found it to be too cost prohibitive for the cable. It might not be that case for a fiber.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we do have some money in our budget to actually do a study on this to see if, that we can come up with something that may introduce, if the mayor wants us to go forward with it, but we've got it in our budget to look at.
How much is it?
Well, we're looking at, we just budgeted 100,000.
For the study?
Yeah, for the study, but we don't have any idea though for sure yet on the costs for that. We haven't been able to actually go out and get proposals yet.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yes, Ralph.
On page 2 of the green sheets, at the bottom, Mayor, you're going to get if you take over the general manager, you're going to get a reduction in pay because they have a general manager listed. Is that funded?
It's a vacancy.
It's sitting at 101.5. So they're getting a good deal on you.
That must be an old number.
So I just wanted to point out, why is that there? And how many of these are funded but vacant in this budget?
There was 44 vacancies in the budget, and that would be one of them.
And they're all funded? Mm-hmm. Okay.
They're not funded, they're just budgeted for.
Well, right.
Yeah. But once you pass the budget, then they'd be funded.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're right.
Yes.
That's the same principle that Alderman McMenamin was talking about in the other departments. I mean, I don't see the sense of funding all these positions when, it's a way, when a lot of these will not get filled.
Ralph, Mr. Chair, if I may, Ralph, on the corporate side, we have an unbalanced budget, so we're really looking at those budgeted but unfilled position. But on the CWLP side, they've got a balanced budget to the extent that those budgeted but unfilled positions don't get filled or whatever, that produces a reserve of money at the end of the year. It creates surplus, which is a good thing. So,
well, it could also be fund balance for them if we take it out. So that way they can't spend it.
It's either way, it's good news.
Right. Thank you.
And just because they are vacant now doesn't mean that necessarily that they will be. I mean, we do plan on hiring some of those people, just like we plan on hiring 6 IBEW, some linemen, for the next, what was that? And February 15th, they're going to start. March 15th.
Thank you very much. Thank you.